Traders, how are you? Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy, co-founder of Speed Up Trader, where you guys can come and apply to use a funded account rather than your own capital in the markets for a process of just $120. Now we're doing Forex and futures as well. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Overall, we had a week of much better news that we normally have been having over this quarantined coronavirus. Hopefully, if you or somebody you know is caught the Rona, I hope you guys are doing better. Looks like we're probably going to be opening the economy very soon, based on what Trump has said as well. On Monday, we over the board on the U.S. stocks. They did head lower due to the fact that the expectation of quarterly earnings was much lower than what everybody was expecting before. There's also signs that there's going to be more long-term damage to the American economy compared to what everybody was saying. Well, it's not going to hurt that bad. We'll have a V-shaped recovery. There's now more and more news and data coming out that is probably going to be worse than better. Tuesday, we had U.S. stocks go far higher. Trade data suggesting that the Chinese economy is now performing better than expected in the recovery. U.S. government also, as I mentioned a moment ago, Trump is talking about getting the economy started, at least in phases, starting in May. Wednesday, we had U.S. stocks fall based on the retail sales drop in March. Mandatory business closures obviously affected that, in addition to the situation with the coronavirus, which caused the closures in the first place. And then we had the consumer spending being the worst decline in decades. Remember what I always try to do these videos and the podcast as well. You guys can listen to it as well. Type in Day Trading Academy into the Spotify or iTunes. You'll be able to find it. If there's a place you can't find it, let me know and I can configure it. But I do these videos to make sure you learn and you can put all the dots together. You guys start learning about how things work to be able not only to help your finances and help kind of your own situation. Obviously, this is for only educational purposes, but I want you to understand that the more developed economies, things like the United States, the majority of Europe, especially Western Europe, Australia, Japan, the majority of the actual economy is consumer spending based. So things like you and I going out and spending money. Whenever we have a situation in the U.S., the last numbers I looked at, which were I think about a year ago, it's close to 70%, the percentage of the economy that's based on consumer spending. So you literally just spending money. Now that we're having a situation where the numbers are showing that the consumer spending is in its worst decline in decades, that's a very bad sign for the economy, due to the fact that we are almost 70% of the economy now is declining by the most in decades. And we also have other news, for example, that restaurants, for example, in the U.S., only 1 out of 5 small business restaurants, restaurants that are run by people like you and I, not the big conglomerates and corporations, the only ones that are going to survive are 1 out of 5. So this is kind of the news that's starting to come out, that the economy isn't going to be as great as everybody is talking about, because the damage is going to be much more fierce than what everybody expected. On Thursday, the U.S. stocks were mostly higher based on the investors largely focusing on the U.S. government plan to be able to go ahead and recover and reopen the economy. Wednesday and Thursday, we had a situation where the oil collapsed, and that was affecting the markets as well. And then Friday, we had a huge stock surge, even though we had a dismal jobs report, as investors are focusing on Trump opening the economy again. There's also news that there's a drug which promising in clinical results called remdesivir from a company called Gilead that is promising for treating the COVID-19, which is great news as well. Overall for the week, the Dow is up 2.20%, just over 24,200 for the year. It's still down just over 15%. S&P 500 is up 3.03% at about 2,800. and it's down about just over 11% for the year, and the Nasdaq is up 6.09% for the week, down almost 3.60% for the year. You guys can see that most of the stocks now have recovered from that bloodbath that we had a few weeks ago. European markets overall are mixed as well. The Swiss is one of the big winners at 1.69% positive. Italy and Russia were the big losers. Russia at 5.63% and Italy at 3.31% respectively. Latin American markets are mostly higher. The Merval in Argentina was up 6.65%. In Africa and the Middle East, they were mixed. Nigeria, the biggest winner at 7.19%. Saudi Arabia, biggest loser at 5.64%. And in Asia, for all of my traders in the Philippines, we have a situation where we have mostly positive results out of Asia, with the Philippines coming in at 5.06%. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency news. Most of the news that's coming out this week are all the analysts talking about how it's supposed to go up much sooner than later, which it hasn't done. It's still not at 50,000 yet, guys, or 100,000 like everybody was predicting it would get to. It's been pretty much between a range in about 6,800 to about 7,300 or so. For the week, it stayed in that range. It went up 3.49% at just under 7,080. In finance and banking news, U.S. banks are bracing for an absolute huge wave for loan defaults due to the economic slowdown. We had a situation where J.P. Morgan Chase, which is the biggest bank in the United States, is setting aside $6.8 billion to protect against the upsurge in loan delinquencies. Wells Fargo is earmarked at about $3.1 billion for bad loans. The Chase quarterly profit is down over 2/3 due to the coronavirus pandemic and record low oil prices. And the quarter one profit for Wells Fargo, which if I'm not mistaken is the fourth or fifth largest bank in the U.S., went from $5.51 billion in the first quarter last year to just $42 million in this first quarter. So that's a huge hit that they're taking. Morgan Stanley, which is the brokerage that's owned by Bank of America, if I'm not mistaken, they should be the second or third largest bank in the U.S., had a 32% fall in quarterly profit as their advisory and wealth management business took a huge hit due to the economic fallout of the pandemic. And on Wednesday, we had a great rebound of the U.S. dollar due to the anxiety that persisted due to the fact that everybody's worried about the economy due to the Rona. That's what I'm going to start saying from now on, the Rona. Other than that, a lot of people are still investing in the U.S. My uncle, he always says this, so I'm going to repeat it. He says that the dollar is the cleanest dirty shirt in the dirty closet, or the cleanest dirty shirt in the dirty closet. So even though a lot of people are considering other currencies to be a little bit riskier bets, for example, like the British pound, a lot of people are migrating to the dollar because they think it's secure. I think this is a false thinking because I always talk about the dollar collapse and the empire of the U.S. not continuing like we should. We always think it's never going to happen in our generation, right? Even though we have a situation where the Roman Empire fell, nobody thought that was going to happen, the British Empire, etc., etc. And we have a situation now where the debt load that we're taking on for the situation with the coronavirus, it's just a massive amount of debt. And before it was going to take probably about 10 years to be able to get to that point where the dollar was going to collapse and there was going to be a reset. Now we're probably looking at 5 to 7 years, and if they continue with this debt for the bailouts, things like the airlines, for example, that are getting, if I'm not mistaken, 42 billion. I'll give you the exact number here in a moment. This isn't sustainable. Debt is debt. Eventually has to be paid back. In commodities, we had a situation where OPEC agreed to a cut of a record 9.7 million barrels per day. Oil still went down by a lot this week due to the fact that it's not going to be able to cover the oversupply of roughly 16.4 billion barrels per day, million barrels per day. Actually, that's correct. The oversupply is 16.4 million barrels per day, and they only cut 9.7. And, we have kind of a double whammy now where we not only have an oversupply, but we have a significant amount of demand going down because everybody's at home due to the quarantine around the world. The world is also running out of places to store the oil, so it'll be interesting to see. We most likely have a lot of down pressure in the next few weeks due to the fact that a lot of the inventory in the world is stocked up. Trump wanted to buy the oil to be able to fill the strategic oil reserve that we have. But the Democrats didn't allow them to do that. They didn't give them permission for that. So we still have a situation where there's too much oil, and it's going to continue to be even more increasing amount of oil with no place to do that. Trump did suggest the Energy Department should pay for the U.S. oil producers to actually leave the oil in the ground and not drill, which is actually not a bad idea. U.S. crude is down 24.57% for the week at $18.27. It's down just over 70% for the year, 70.40%. International Brent is down 11.27 for the week at $28.29. It's down 57.19% in 2020. Copper predictions are falling as predicted due to the deeper global recession. The price of copper has gone down from $6,300 a ton to as low as $4,371 per ton. Gold hit a 7-year high on Tuesday with demand continuing. A lot of the gold companies and silver companies, the precious metals dealers, they don't have any more, coins to be able to sell. If you guys remember the last few years, I've been talking about the great investment that oil and silver are. Now, if you're considering about buying them, unfortunately you can't find it because even the factories where they make it, the mints are even closing down because obviously people are catching the coronavirus and they want to be safe. So the time to buy would have been before something happened, not when it's actually happening, for those of you guys that are looking at that. Because remember, I did talk about that. If you haven't seen the video that I did, I didn't upload it on the podcast because it's more a visual medium, but I talked about how I'm trading right now. Remember, for educational purposes only, the feds always want us to say that, right? It's not trading advice. Since we're not trading advisors, we don't trade people's money, but watch the video that I did about how I'm trading right now with the silver miners, as the prediction and what I told you guys about the mining price being right around $14 or so. It could be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but silver was smashed to about $12 and change, and it's already recovered to about 16, just under 16, and great opportunities in those markets. Gold for the week is down 1.76% at $1,687.50. There was a Tuesday's high of $1,733.40, reaching a 7-year high. Silver is down 1.37% to $15.29, with a high of about $18.90 recently. In political news, Bernie Sanders, Obama, and Warren, all who, except Obama, Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, both detested and fought with Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee for the presidential candidate for the Democrats, for the left, the left side. They all have endorsed Vice President Joe Biden, which is a move to be able to unify or show that they're unified in the Democratic Party, even though a lot of analysts and people have said that there's a lot of fractures within the party, etc., etc. Remember, one of the things I do want to let you know is that I never want to get political when I record the videos. I think most of us are unfortunately tired of the political back and forth and the fighting and all that stuff. So remember, it doesn't matter, who you support, what side you're on. If you're black, white, purple, Asian, Martian, doesn't matter. I always want to just try to report the facts to be able to teach you how to be able to understand, not only inform you what's going on in the world, but also understand what's happening. U.S. Supreme Court, it says for the first time ever that they're going to start hearing cases by teleconference rather than in the courtroom due to the Rona. I'm going to start saying that, the Rona. Including a dispute that Trump should release his tax and financial records. That's something that they're going to decide on as well. Trump's move to halt funding for the WHO, the World Health Organization, has prompted condemnation on Wednesday by some world leaders. Trump said that he's stopping the funding due to the fact that the WHO tried to hide and misinform the world, and if they didn't do that, this is what they're saying, that if they didn't do that, we wouldn't have this pandemic in the world, and a lot of people wouldn't have died, and we wouldn't have so much financial pain at the moment. The WHO actually reported that it cannot be transmitted from humans to humans. It also reported that when Trump closed the borders from China, which ended up being the right decision, they said that it was racist to close borders when everybody's actually doing now. It's rather ironic. Global infections have passed the $2 million mark, and the U.S. is the world's largest contributor at about $400 million in 2019, which is roughly 15% of its budget. In economic news, China, The Central Bank of China is most likely expected to cut their rate for a second time in 2020 on Monday after it's confirmed, if you want to pay attention or actually believe the numbers coming out of China, after it's been reported that their economy shrank by 6.8%, which probably means that it contracted by a lot more than that due to the Rona in the first quarter. It's the first contraction since 1992 when the government first began reporting it. There's actually some analysts that say that this might actually be the first economic contraction since the 1970s for China. I'll let you guys know about that in just a moment. I thought that was really interesting. Business activity in China has returned to 83% of capacity, up from 70% in a month ago, and many analysts are expecting the economy to grow at just 2% this year for the full year 2020, which is 1/3 of the original forecast. I stopped letting you guys know what the IMF and all these World Bank and expected the growth to be because they're always wrong anyway. I don't know if you remember the head of the central bank of the United States, the Ben Bernanke, he actually said that there's absolutely no way that there's any problem in the housing market right before the 2008-2009 crisis. This is why I always tell you guys, never, ever pay attention to what they say on the news, because they're not actually reporting the facts. Whether it's the right or the left, they're all just, dummies, and they're just trying to convince you what they want you to believe rather than actually reporting the facts. That's why I like to do these videos so you guys can actually learn what's happening, because it's one thing about what they say, it's a completely separate thing to see what they do and what it actually means to be able to connect the dots. India's economy was already weakening before the coronavirus, and now it's giving fewer investors the reasons to buy Indian stocks and bonds due to the lockdown and now the more pressure on the banking system. I don't know if you remember. If I remember correctly, I reported it here on the recap. The 7th largest bank in India was nationalized due to the fact that it wasn't doing so well. So now the central bank is expected to cut rates to be able to go and help that economy as well. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, states that the global economy is expected to shrink by 3% during 2020, the steepest downturn since the Great Depression in the 1930s. JP Morgan economists are now expecting that the U.S. unemployment rate is going to reach 20% in Q2 before recovering in the final 6 months of the year. Annualized U.S. GDP, they're stating that's going to contract by 40% between April and June period. The UK's economy may shrink 35% in Q2 as unemployment could more than double to 10% due to the Rona shutdown. And the Office for Budget Responsibility says that the budget deficit could hit £273 billion or $342 roughly billion in the 2020-21 tax year. That's 5 times the previous estimates, an equivalent of about 14% of GDP, which is the biggest since World War II. And for my dearest Colombia, they're expecting 95. They did a survey. I was thinking of the Spanish word encuesta, for those of you guys who want to learn some Spanish. Nearly 95% of Colombian businesses surveyed by the Chamber of Commerce have seen sales drop by 50%, 50. Amid the quarantine measures, they just reported they extended the quarantine recently in Colombia as well, and they're actually talking about extending closures for bars, clubs, and restaurants for a year, which I don't think they're going to be able to do. 17% of businesses have temporarily shut. 12.8% have requested credit to keep operating, and 9% of businesses have closed down. And speaking of closing down, analysts are now predicting that just 1 out of 5 restaurants in the U.S. are going to be able to stay open after this Rona shutdown. So 20%. A lot of the big chains, Chipotle and all the corporations, those will be able to stay open because they have access to obviously a lot more capital, but a lot of the small business owned restaurants, only 1 out of 5. Can you imagine? So I don't think this is going to be a V recovery, and after this I don't think the country will ever be the same anymore. In the U.S., 5.2 million more U.S. workers are likely going to seek unemployment benefits, have done that last week. They're expecting. It lifts the total claims past month to a whopping 22 million. It shows a deepening American economy slumped by the pandemic. In corporate news, Smithfield Foods CEO Kenneth Sullivan, says that the U.S. is perilously close to the edge when it comes to meat supply after he closed his Sioux Falls, and I probably said the city name wrong, but they have a processing facility in South Dakota which accounts about to 4% of U.S. pork production, and they're closing it down due to the situation with the coronavirus. Just so you know, I think it's really funny, the coronavirus. So go out and buy some meat because it's probably going to run out soon due to the supply chain issues. Ford is posting a pre-tax loss of about $2 billion for quarter one due to the coronavirus, as the demand and the outbreak pummeled sales and shuttered a lot of their factories. It resulted in a 21% drop in vehicle sales with dealers versus same quarter in 2019. Amazon has reached a a new high on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. A lot of people ordering stuff online. I myself tried to find some equipment to work out at the house, and unfortunately wasn't available. It was all sold out. They're going to hire 75,000 employees now, even after they've already hired 100,000 employees in their distribution centers since mid-March. With the long-term financial situation becoming more untenable, now JCPenney is considering bankruptcy protection since they were already in trouble due to the situation that they were in before the Rona went everywhere. Neiman Marcus is also considering bankruptcy protection as well. They have enough cash to survive another few months of store closures, but their financing options remain open. Thursday, U.S. retailer Walmart reached an all-time high. It's up 7% in 5 days, hitting just over $132, a gain of over 10% of 2020. Netflix has surged to a new high, $449.52. And they're up over 37% this year. In trade news, Philippine banana exports, for all of you guys that are listening in the Philippines, may drop 40% in 2020. There's a drop of 2.5 million ton this year compared to 4 million in 2009. And just for an interesting thing, Ecuador is actually the largest exporter of bananas in the world. I actually looked that up. If I'm not mistaken, Colombia was fourth. In technology, Apple, trying to get a little bit more market share, has dropped their price for a new iPhone at just $399. It's cutting the price to be able to go ahead and attract more buyers due to the Rona financial collapse that's causing on everybody. Tesla's Shanghai plant production in the local Model 3s, including 2 newer versions, has seen a 450% month-over-month increase in registrations in March, and the registrations are up to about 12,709 compared to 2,314. And in good news for the Rona, we have a situation where there may be a drug from Gilead Sciences. Their stock actually surged 10%, 13% at one point in pre-market trading after there was a media report that people with severe symptoms of the disease responded positively, making rapid recoveries after using the remdesivir, which is one of their drugs, which was in a clinical trial to experiment the drug. In investment news, India is restarting some of its manufacturing this week, even as the world's biggest lockdown is extended to the end of April. U.S. Commerce Department is stating that retail sales fell 8.7%, which is more than expected. It's another indication that the Rona, is affecting a big effect on the U.S. economy, much bigger than anybody anticipated. And this is the biggest monthly decline since the record started in 1992. Now, this is a problem because remember that the biggest part of the economy is consumer spending. So what you and I spend our money on in the US and every other more advanced economy like the UK and Australia and Japan, more advanced economies, what they used to call the first world before it became not politically correct to do so. But if we stop spending money, that's all close to 70% of the economy the last time I checked, which was last year. So people stop spending money, they're saving more money, it's going to put a huge toll on the economy, and I don't think it's going to be the same anymore after this pandemic. Japan's SoftBank posted a huge loss in a collapse of its tech investments. They're forecasting a $12.5 billion loss through their fiscal year ending in the 31st of March. They reported an 18.56 billion % profit in 2019. That's what happened, guys, when you invest into companies that don't make any money, like WeWork, for example. Duh. In global airlines, they're going to be likely to lose $314 billion in revenue due to the coronavirus in 2020. They've had a 55% drop in passenger traffic, and also air traffic has seen a 48% drop. Other than that, the U.S. Treasury Department is holding firm on their offer to give them a $25 billion bailout to help meet the payroll needs due to the Rona shutdown. And other than that, the government could actually end up owning anywhere between 1 to 3% of some of these companies like American, United, JetBlue, Delta, and even Southwest. Number of new houses built in the U.S. saw its biggest decline since 1984. New housing starts shrank by 22%. This is actually a very big part of the economy as well. If I'm not mistaken, I think the last time I checked, I'm just throwing this number out there because I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was about 15-20% of the actual economy between the actual construction materials and then the extension of a lot of these things. So it's, everything's taking a hit right now with the Rona. And Euro March sales drop on record, the most on record since new sales across the EU plunging about 55.1%. Volkswagen is down over 43%. Renault and PSA Group is down 63 and 67%, respectively. BMW fell by 39.7%, and Daimler, which is part of Mercedes, went down by over 40%. New car sales fell 37.9% last month. In international events, so far there's been 2.2 million reported cases of COVID-19, 154,000 deaths, and expected to cause a global recession, which is not seen in generations. On Tuesday, Spain and Austria allowed partial returns. The UK, France, and India are actually extending the Rona shutdowns. And other than that, in unusual facts, nurses, in the great decisions that they make in Mexico, nurses in a public hospital which was worst hit by the coronavirus since the start of the pandemic were told by managers not to wear protective masks to try to allow to stop a panic that may occur between the patients. German Oktoberfest, which receives over 6 million tourists per year, mostly overseas, is not going to be held this year for the first time ever, which is going to be, I don't think a lot of these big events are going to be the same now in the future. Some industry analysts are estimating only 1 in 5 of the global restaurants, or U.S. restaurants, are going to survive the shutdown. 11 million jobs are going to be affected in the economy, which contributes about 4% of GDP. So you can see consumer spending 70%, even if we go out and spend in restaurants, for example, right? The new housing, which is 15-20% of GDP. Now we have the restaurants, which are 4%. This is just starting to stack up and up and up and up and up. And that doesn't even include how we're mortgaging not only our children's futures, I think I can say that now, I'm old enough, right? But also our grandchildren's future and great-grandchildren's future as well. Other than that, first time China may actually have experienced a quarterly economic contraction. The date exactly that I mentioned earlier was 1976, when communist leader Mao Zedong died, ending a decade of social and economic tumult. And Bob Iger, which is the former CEO of Disney, is back at the helm due to the fact that Disney now is in big trouble since they are down revenue about $5 billion. And he's actually credited for allowing Disney to become an entertainment behemoth. And other than that, scientists, this is actually really interesting. Scientists extract dental enamel from the oldest human genetic material ever obtained from a Spanish cave fossil. They are calling it Homo antecessor, and it's actually interesting because it's clarifying a pivotal place in the human evolutionary lineage of mysterious extinct species, which I thought was very interesting. A 102-year-old woman recovered from the Rona in northern Italy of Genoa after spending more than 20 days in the hospital, and a 106-year-old woman from the UK has recovered from the coronavirus in the UK, which is actually, she's the oldest person in the kingdom to be able to go ahead and survive the disease. And in the US, the demand for gas has dropped nearly 44% in February. People avoid travel and attempt to remain healthy. Gas prices worldwide averaged about $1.84 per gallon, and in some places in southeast Wisconsin, they're down under $1 a gallon. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe here to the channel. Look up the podcast if you want to listen, and we'll see you next week.